Greetings, sisters, and welcome to Wonder Woman, Warrior for Peace. My name is Angela, and this is episode 13. Alright, first anniversary. That is really awesome. I'm kind of not sure I really expect it to last this long, but hey, it's pretty cool. It's been really great getting a lot of positive feedback from other podcasters. They've all been very welcoming, which is lovely. And getting to hear from people who either heard the show referenced on some other podcast or just kind of randomly found it and they send in a message and tell me how much they liked it. It's pretty amazing. I always love hearing that it's not just me alone in this room talking into a microphone like a crazy woman. There are actually people out there listening and enjoying it. So really, really fun. I've definitely learned a lot. Go back and listen to those first two episodes and it's kind of cringy, but I've gotten better with practice and learning different techniques and stuff for editing and all that fun stuff. Another thing, you go back and you hear me talking about how there needs to be a Wonder Woman podcast, so now I'm making it. And then of course in the intervening 12 months there's like 6 of us now? I've kind of lost track. Let's see here. Radio Free Themyscira, and you got Diana Prince, and you got Lasso of Truth. Oh, and then just this month, Wonder Words premiered, and next month Satin Tights is supposed to come out with episodes. Those are both shows focused on the Linda Carter show. So, yeah, 6 of us. Six Wonder Woman podcasts in 1 year. Kinda crazy, but definitely awesome. I'm going to be playing promos for them during the show, and then at the end I've got a little special something cooked up for the anniversary, so definitely make sure you stick around after the reviews. We start out, as usual, with today's pre-crisis comic, Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 11. Cover date was November 1942. Writer was Charles Moulton, who of course we know was really William Moulton Marsden, and the artist was Harry G. Peter. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Archives, Volume 1. Colonel Darnell learns that neither Steve nor Diana showed up to work that day. He sends a man to Trevor's apartment, who discovers the Major in bed, alive but completely unresponsive. A doctor is called, and when all attempts to rouse Steve have failed, he's taken to a hospital. Meanwhile, Diana's room is abandoned, and foul play is suspected as the door was locked from the inside and the window is too high to jump from. But in Etta Candy's dorm, the college girl is discovered still asleep but fully clothed, with Wonder Woman in the room's second bed. When they can't be awoken, they're taken to the hospital as well, but all tests for toxins come back negative, and the doctors are at a loss. We then get a flashback where we see Diana Prince putting on magnetized earrings she got from Queen Desira during her Justice Society mission to Venus. They give the wearer magnetized hearing so Desira can communicate with the superhero whenever she needs. Tonight the Amazon receives a message telling her she's needed on the planet Eros. The people there face extinction, and when Wonder Woman tells the Queen that she doesn't have access to a spaceship, she's told that humans' astral bodies can travel wherever they want when their physical bodies are asleep, and will appear wearing the same clothes as their corporeal form. Note to self, I don't care how hot it gets at night, it's only full-length, very thick pajamas from here on out. Diana changes into her costume, and, realizing it could be problematic if Wonder Woman is discovered in Diana Prince's quarters, leaps out the window and heads to Holiday College. Despite the Amazon's warning that the mission will be dangerous, Etta insists on coming along, dressing in her full get-up complete with cowboy hat and boots. Once asleep, the women's astral forms are greeted by the Venusian Queen, who warns of fighting on Eros and recommends bringing a soldier along. They find Steve, and Desira is able to give him a message that Wonder Woman needs his help and to put on his uniform. Somehow. They don't really explain how she was able to communicate with him while on the astral plane, but they do make a point of saying that he convinces himself halfway through dressing that it was just a dream and so falls asleep without his tie and jacket. In his astral body he meets the 3 women, learning he wasn't dreaming, and they all take off for Eros, which we're told has only been recently discovered by Earth astronomers. They reach the capital city Joyala with the speed of thought, and being told by the departing Desira that their astral minds understand a person's thoughts and eliminate the need for a translator, meet with Maria, the planetary mother and supreme judge, at the Palace of Judgment. They're surprised to learn that the convicts on trial are overjoyed at being sent to jail, with one prisoner begging to go back when she learns she's being freed and commanded to lead the city's symphony. Maria offers the Earthlings a brief sentence as thanks for their willingness to help, and when they refuse, says she wishes Rebla, the person causing all the trouble for their planet, had shared their dedication to duty. She then explains that the prisons on Eros are created to give those living inside perfect happiness, and so every citizen, much to their delight, is imprisoned at age 15. We learned that Rebla was an acclaimed athlete in prison, skilled at dancing and something called man-fishing, which involves catching men with fishing rods that have a weight on the end of the line instead of a hook. It kind of looks like they swing the rod as if they were fly fishing and the line wraps around the guy. In addition to great strength, she was also an electrical genius, developing a paralysis ray gun whose effects had to be discharged by tapping the victim with a copper tube. Things were perfect for Rebla until the day she was charged with being fit to govern. She argued in court that she hated responsibility and was unfit to rule, but was found guilty and sentenced to lead a place called Transmontania. There, the responsibility of leadership gave her no leisure time, until she finally holed up in her lab and refused to so much as sign a peace treaty. This, of course, led to war with the planet's central government, but when the all-women army arrived to arrest Rebla, they were met by her men, each armed with paralysis guns, and were easily defeated. We then return to the present, where Maria shows Wonder Woman a letter they received from Transmontania, in which Rebla tells of her intent to continue the war, destroying the government and locking them away in a new type of prison she's created. The Amazon develops ray-blocking bracelets and trains the soldiers to use them, and they enter the next battle with Steve at the lead. Unfortunately, the soldiers are too slow with their bracelets, and the enemy pushes the advantage until Wonder Woman and Etta sweep in with the cavalry. The rebels' commander is quickly caught in the magic lasso and forced to order his men to surrender. Leaving Etta with the prisoners, Wonder Woman and Steve lead their troops after the escaping soldiers, but walk right into an ambush and are all paralyzed. Taken to the rebels' prison, the paralysis is discharged for everyone except Wonder Woman, whose strength would let her easily break out. She does manage to fight the ray's effects enough to speak, remarking to Rebla that the woman had wanted to stay in prison, but she wouldn't dare be locked up now. The leader defiantly surrenders to her own guards, but quickly finds that a prison where the inmates aren't allowed to do whatever they want isn't any fun. She calls for Dominus, the man she set up as the new leader of Eros, and tells him he must free her so she can undo the paralysis on Wonder Woman, who's been immobilized so long her life is now at risk. But he's fine with letting the Amazon perish, and haughtily tells Rebla that, as a prisoner, she should remember her place. Thankfully, Steve manages to trick a guard into getting too close, and is able to grab the keys before knocking out the jailer with a punch. He unlocks Rebla, who quickly restores Wonder Woman's ability to move. The Amazon starts tearing doors off cells, and soon the now former prisoners are running free. They rush to the capital, where Wonder Woman stops Dominus before he can have Maria and Etta executed. With the Supreme Mother back on the throne, Rebla is judged to have not been competent to rule after all, and is sentenced back to prison where she can continue her research uninterrupted. After refusing another offer of jail time in thanks for their services, the Earthlings return to their corporeal bodies, waking up in the hospital where they spent the last 10 days. Everyone is happy to see them, but at Darnell's mention of Diana, Wonder Woman rushes out the window, and the secretary soon appears, saying only that she was rescued by the amazing Amazon. This is definitely the most sci-fi issue we've had so far for the 40s. I mean, Amazons with invisible planes and purple healing rays is one thing, but this is straight up going to another planet with aliens and ray guns, which is always fun. Although I should point out that, much like Kryptonians, the inhabitants of Eros do happen to look exactly like humans. The look of the civilization on Eros is very Roman-inspired. The soldiers wear very centurion-looking helmets, and Dominus, the guy who ends up leading the planet for a little bit, very much looks like your stereotypical Caesar. The Emperor, not the salad, in case you were confused. Oh, and I did like the look of Queen Desira. She was wearing this bright floral dress, very 20s looking, and she's got giant butterfly wings like she's a fairy. The reference here at the beginning to the Queen giving Wonder Woman special earrings, that's calling back to the issue of Sensation Comics where Wonder Woman first officially joined the Justice Society, which I did talk a little bit about last episode. This issue has some great comedy bits. When they find Etta sleeping, there's, well, technically it looks like a thought bubble, but in context you can tell it's supposed to be a sound effect, with a picture of a saw slicing through a log, which is a whole lot more creative than your typical, line of Z's. And then when they go to pick up Steve, he is sitting there by himself, thinking out loud that he wishes he knew where Wonder Woman was, and he's probably going to have another dream about her that night, and she gets pretty embarrassed. In that same scene, they do mention that they're going into the other room while Steve changes, and I really like that. You know, there was no kind of, oh yeah, soldier boy, take off your shirt while we just stand here invisible. You know, if this was done today, it'd be almost impossible for them to resist that, and it's just not necessary. I like that they respected Steve enough to give him his privacy. One thing I found funny was that the doctors in the hospital are like, oh my goodness, what possible toxin could knock out Wonder Woman? And I'm like, well, she gets dosed by chloroform all the time in the TV show. And just last issue, she got hit by that knockout perfume and went out like a light. So, yeah, apparently there's a lot of stuff that can incapacitate Wonder Woman. Obviously, the planet Eros is named after the Greek god, who we've seen in the New 52 run. But while the comic says that Earth astronomers have been able to detect this planet recently, I can't find any record of one. There is an asteroid called 433 Eros that was discovered in the 1890s, though I'm not really sure that counts as recent for this 1942 comic book. The whole thing with, you know, oh, the prisons are great and everyone wants to be there because they're run by women. I get it, Marsden, you're trying to sell your ideology. I'm just not sure anyone's buying it, to be perfectly honest with you. Although, in classic Etta fashion, when she sees that the prisoners are excited to go back to jail, the first thing that comes into her head is to wonder whether that's because the prison guards feed them candy. Oh, Etta, never ever change. I thought the man-fishing was a great little quirky detail. That really seemed to be their main weapon, was these modified fishing poles. I mean, when the central government's army attacked the rebel forces, they all looked like they were off for a weekend at the lake. Which, I mean, going up against paralysis guns is just a little ridiculous. At the end, it mentions that our heroes were unconscious for 10 days, which, I mean, that's coma-level unconscious at that point. So, yeah, that is a whole lot more dangerous than Desira's whole, oh no, it's fine, you'll just be asleep, no big deal. So, not a bad issue. I'm gonna give it 3 stars.
Broadcasting live from the Invisible Jet, this is Radio Free Themyscira.
The nation needs Wonder Woman!
On Paradise Island, home of the eternally young and beautiful Amazon.
Wonder Woman.
Athena, give me strength!
Who knows she has the strength of Hercules?
But Themyscira!
Who knows she has the wisdom of Athena?
Will it all the ways of the future? And sisterhood is stronger than anything.
Princess Diana, the Wonder Woman.
Radio Free Themyscira, coming soon to Patriarch's World.
And Radio Free Themyscira can be heard on iTunes, archive.org, blueberry.com, that's BLUBRRY.com, and on the Radio Free Themyscira Facebook page. Moving on to the post-crisis, we have Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 13, Demon Plague. This is Challenge of the Gods, Book 4. Cover date was February 1988. Plots and layouts were by George Perez. Script was by Len Wein. The finishes were by Bruce D. Patterson. The letters were by John Costanza. The colors were by Carl Gafford. And the editor was Karen Berger. And I'm reading this from the Wonder Woman by George Perez Omnibus. Far beneath Paradise Island, Hippolyta looks up at the giant figure of Heracles, turned to stone but somehow still alive, groaning in anguish at the sharp claws of the harpies. The queen says that she's despised him for centuries, but has learned how useless that kind of hatred is thanks to her time on Paradise Island. She wonders how he could have ended up with such a fate, but has to continue down the path to search for her daughter. She descends to a bone-littered cavern where she finds the sleeping form of a Cyclops. She tries sneaking past him, but suddenly recognizes one of the bones, a skull with small goat horns protruding from the forehead. Watching from Olympus, Zeus recognizes the skull as well. It can only belong to his grandson, Pan. The goat god's father, Hermes, is astonished, wondering if Pan is dead, who's been masquerading in his place. The king of the gods says whoever it was will pay for the deception, and then something happens that's never happened in the history of the world. Hera stands up to Zeus. She tells him that his arrogance and pride were the reason he was deceived. It's caused the gods nothing but trouble for millennia, and she won't let him misuse the Amazons, who she now realizes are going to be the ultimate fulfillers of Gaia's destiny. Athena points out that the false Pan misled Diana away from her quest, which according to the fates she must complete. So Hermes is sent to bring her back. He travels to the planet Oa, where he finds her in a large group of Earth's heroes. Appearing to her alone, he tells her how the supposed Pan was actually working with the Manhunters to keep her from her mission, and that she must return at once to help her mother. They take off, and we cut back to Hippolyta being grabbed up by the awoken Cyclops. He's surprised to learn his initial attack didn't kill her, saying his blindness prevented him from being sure. The Queen rightly guesses that this must be Polyphemus, the Cyclops who Odysseus stabbed in the eye on his way back to Ithaca all those millennia ago. The one-eyed giant hopes the Queen will make him a better meal than his last, indigestibly shaggy one. But then Wonder Woman appears, socking him in the jaw and causing him to drop his prey. The two women reunite, but as Mother and Monster prepare to re-engage, Diana flies forward and snares the Cyclops in her unbreakable lasso, binding him to a pillar. Hearing the Amazons talk of escape, Polyphemus begs them to end his suffering, explaining that when his kind were imprisoned beneath Themyscira, they began eating each other until only he remained, and his blindness means he has to wait for food to be given to him. He goes ages between meals, hungry all the while, and his last rather goaty dinner gave him unending indigestion. Magically prevented from dying except by being slain, he asks that they give him a quick death, but before they can decide what to do, Hippolyta, but no one else, hears Heracles calling her for help. She rushes off to free him, explaining to her daughter that despite his horrific crimes against her, she can't allow his torment to continue. She speeds back up the path, only to be hit by a fireball. Diana flies after her, finding her mother at the feet of the petrified demigod, throat in the hands of the Minotaur, and with Echidna and the Chimera right behind. Echidna tells the Amazons that before they die, they will watch Heracles' stone skin finally be pierced by the Harpies, which the Minotaur says will reveal the true final horrors of this place. Realizing that Zeus's greatest treasure must be his son, Diana vows to protect him, attacking the bull monster. She knocks it down and dodges the Chimera's flames, only to be caught in Echidna's coils. But Hippolyta strikes off the serpent's head with her axe before getting hit from behind by the Minotaur. Wonder Woman flings it across the cavern, but as it gets ready to charge, the newly freed Polyphemus scoops it up, glad to have found a new meal. The bull headbutts the giant jaw, and as the Cyclops thrashes in agony, the stone arch beneath his feet is shaken apart, sending the two monsters plummeting down into the bottomless abyss. At her injured mother's side, Diana wonders how Polyphemus escaped the lasso. Suddenly, a beautiful woman, clad in white and carrying the lasso, appears in a shaft of golden light, explaining that she's the one who freed him. She is Harmonia, newly restored daughter of Ares, whom Wonder Woman met at the beginning of her quest, and who disguised herself as a vulture to help Hippolyta through the caves. Before disappearing, she once again gives Diana her talisman, which she says someone pure of essence can use to trap the horrors of this place and return them to their rightful keeper, Ares. The princess knows this must somehow be connected to rescuing Heracles, and ultimately decides that the only way he can be saved is through forgiveness. The Olympians watch on, commenting how another woman made from clay, Pandora, was the first to release the demon plague, and that Diana can only hope to challenge the evil through the pure beauty of her soul and being one with Gaia. Landing on Heracles' stony shoulder, Diana points out that the demigod and her mother must be connected somehow, as she's the only one who can hear his cries. Deciding they need to see the truth about each other, she loops the lasso around Heracles' head, binding her mother tight against him. The Queen and the demigod share some kind of psychic link, seeing each other's deepest thoughts, each feeling the other's pain. Hippolyta whispers one name, Antiope, before we're told they both find the first peace they've had in centuries. Then the rocky form of Heracles cracks open, finally releasing the demon plague from its host. It appears as a massive tube of fire, snaking its way back up the passage to the outside world. Wonder Woman flies after it at top speed, outpacing the flames and turning just in front of the final door, which is no longer sealed. She holds the talisman aloft, which blocks the fire like a shield and starts to absorb it. We watch as earthquakes rock Themyscira, and then the whole world as Wonder Woman struggles to keep the burning disc in place. Finally, the torrent of pure evil is all contained, and the talisman is drawn into another realm, with Diana still holding tight, despite the incredible pain. She finds herself in Areopagus, greeted by its ruler, Ares. He tells the Amazon that thanks to her showing him the error of his ways, he's now able to control the immense power that is rightfully his. She's reluctant at first, but he tells her to use her Athena-given wisdom, and she knows it's the right thing to do. He takes the amulet and absorbs its power, crying out that the first part of the demon plague was released when Pandora's box was opened by a woman made from clay, and now the rest of it, and the ultimate destructive power that goes with, was given to him by another. The god transforms into a fireball and flies off across the sky, leaving behind peals of sinister laughter. Diana watches him go, distraught that she may have made the wrong choice, but turns to see Harmonia, who tells her that her mission is at an end and balance is restored. She has proved her status as the ultimate warrior, and new challenges await her on 2 worlds. The daughter of Ares wishes her farewell and disappears in a flash, but Diana is soon joined by Hermes, who has one final challenge for her: to track down the Pan impersonator and make him pay. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, this plotline was more than a little confusing. I actually had to look up another few recaps before I understood what was actually going on. Basically, there's this power called the Demon Plague that was inside Pandora's box, and it needs a host, and Heracles has been its host, but now it's freed from him and given to Ares, who it rightfully belongs to, but he couldn't control it because he was gone crazy and wanted to nuke the whole world, but now that he's back to normal, he can take this power back again. Clear as mud? Okay then. If that doesn't seem to make too much sense, I can explain it all in one word. Comics. Wacky, convoluted stories are in fact a staple of the genre, people. A lot of mythological references to go over. The Cyclops were a species of giants that only had one eye, and they lived on an island in, well, the Mediterranean, because obviously Greece is in the Mediterranean, and that's where all of their stories take place. And in the Odyssey, the hero Odysseus visits that island on his way back to Ithaca, his home, after the Trojan War, and he gets trapped in a cave by this Cyclops named Polyphemus, and he tricks it, because he's Odysseus, and manages to blind it while it is asleep. The Minotaur was a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull. It was kept in a labyrinth, well, the labyrinth, on the island of Crete, and in mythology, of course, was killed by the hero Theseus, but in the comic here, the Minotaur says that Theseus just thought he'd killed him. The Chimera was another monster. Traditionally, it had a goat's body with a lion's head and a snake for a tail. And because that isn't horrific enough, it could also breathe fire. Oh, and Echidna, who I believe I mentioned previously was called the Mother of Monsters. She specifically says she has a grudge against Heracles because he killed her son, the Nemean lion, which was one of his 12 labors. Pandora, I had actually forgotten the fact that she was made from clay, so that was actually pretty cool. So yeah, she was the first woman who was created from clay by the gods. And she somehow was given or obtained the infamous Pandora's box, which I think technically the translation is jar, really, but everyone calls it Pandora's box, so I'm just going to go with Pandora's box. And she opened it up, and all of the evils of the world escaped. So definitely a curiosity killed the cat kind of thing. We finally learned the fate of Pan, that he was fed to Polyphemus quite a while ago, actually, since all that's left is now bones, and Polyphemus says he's still been hungry for years and years. The fate of the Pan robot, because that's what ultimately we find out happened. The creature that we thought was Pan was actually one of the Manhunters. How can an alien space robot impersonate a Greek god, you ask? Easy. Comics. We're mashing 20 different genres together here, people. You just kind of have to go with it. Anyway, his ultimate fate is revealed in the Millennium crossover. Basically, Wonder Woman confronts him, and he tries to run away, and she gets him with the lasso, but it, literally tears him apart, and inside is all, circuitry and wires and stuff. If you're interested in the Millennium crossover, Chris Sheehan on his blog, Chris is on Infinite Earths, recently did a recap of Millennium with a whole bunch of scans. So I will make sure there is a link in the show notes so that you can definitely check that out. I absolutely loved seeing Hera finally stand up to Zeus. That really is something she never did in the mythology, and it's so great to see her finally just be fed up with his stupidity here. One thing I wanted to mention, when Wonder Woman is fighting the Minotaur, she kind of grabs it by the horns and flips over and smashes its head into the ground, which, I mean, is a really great action panel. You can really feel the movement in the art. But it also reminded me of the bull leaping from ancient Crete. You would have these acrobats in a ring, and the bull would charge at them, and they grab it by the horns, and it bucks and flips them up over its back, and they do somersaults and, I guess, try to land on its back, or try to land on the ground behind it. It was this completely insane sport that must have been both thrilling and horrifying to watch. So, nice kind of callback here to Wonder Woman doing the same thing with the Minotaur, which of course was from Crete. The whole forgiving Heracles thing, okay, I truly do believe in forgiveness, but what he did, I would have an incredibly hard time forgiving someone who did that, even if it wasn't to me. And even if I could eventually come to forgive someone, I don't know that I would ever be able to trust them ever again. So, yeah, a pretty good issue. I do want to I am marking it down just a little bit, just because it did get a bit confusing towards the end. But still a good issue, so 3 stars.
Wonder Woman is one of the greatest, most long-lived and visibly recognizable icons of female empowerment the world has ever known. That's a crushing weight of expectation to place on someone's shoulders, and Princess Diana of the Amazons has faced scathing criticism for her entire existence as a result. I'm Diablo Frank, and I've been a fan of the Amazing Amazon for my entire life, but she didn't become one of my absolute favorite superheroes until the 1990s. That doesn't seem all that long ago to me, but every year I meet more adults who are otherwise preoccupied getting born around then, so I guess it's been a spell. I try to be a good feminist and all-around decent guy, but I'm still a human being chock full of character flaws, quirks, and hang-ups that make me less than anyone's ideal. Despite being an admirable heroine fighting for her rights in her satin tights, Wonder Woman is as human as Adam, and they have the same basic origin. But boy, did that guy make a mess of things. Shouldn't we extend someone with Wonder Woman's track record the same courtesy and empathy we can and should offer to the rest of the world? To be truthful, I'm not a typical fan of the Paradise Island set. I'm not big on mythology, and I'm highly critical of the most popular Themysciran stories. I like it when Wonder Woman loses her powers and hangs out with a tiny blind Asian martial arts master named I Ching, or when she works at Taco Bell and helps collect child support for a coworker from a deadbeat mafioso dad, or when she rides around on kangaroo ponies from outer space and is a little too into bondage and spanking for the squares. Wonder Woman is great, but I really miss Diana Prince, the reminder that the heroine feels and fails and bleeds like the rest of us. That's why I call my podcast about her Diana Prince Wonder Woman, and the music playing in the background is from the off-model Kathy Lee Crosby TV movie from 1974, because I like to remember there's a woman behind all that wonder, and I'd like to talk about her if you care to listen, on iTunes, Shout Engine, and the Internet Archive.
Next up, we have the New 52 with Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 0, The Lair of the Minotaur. Cover date was November 2012. Story and art were by Brian Azzarello and Cliff Chang. The coloring was by Matt Wilson. The lettering was by Jared Fletcher. Assists were by Chris Conroy, and the editor was Matt Idelson. And I'm reading this from Wonder Woman Volume 3, Iron. Now, before I get started, I should explain, in celebration of the 1-year anniversary of the New 52, all of the comic books came out with a special issue number 0, which told either the origin story of their hero or filled in some kind of backstory for their characters. So not only is this Wonder Woman story set when she's still a child on Themyscira, it's also done in the style of a classic 60s era comic. There's narration boxes and thought bubbles, which nobody really uses anymore. And it's really great here, the list of the creators, they all have nicknames, just like in the 1960s, the guy over at Marvel, Stan Lee, he would give all of his creators fun nicknames that he would use in the comic. So here we have like Cliff Chump Chang and Jittery Jared Fletcher. Stuff like that. 12-year-old Diana is scaling a stony precipice, headed toward a nest of cantaloupe-sized eggs, while the ocean splashes against the rocks far below. She reaches the summit, bending to retrieve an egg, when a harpy dives out of the sky, screeching for her to stay away from its children. The young Amazon tells the monster that it's her birthday, and the egg will be used to make her cake. She dives backwards off into the ocean, egg firmly gripped under an arm, then swims to an underwater cavern. Inside, she surfaces to find a group of Amazons wielding torches, led by her mother the queen. Hippolyta, secretly nervous her daughter might have failed, tells Diana that it is Amazon tradition that she must give the queen a worthy gift, or else her new year will be ignored by the community. Which I think just means she won't have a birthday party. The girl presents the harpy's egg, and her sisters cheer, lifting her off the ground in celebration. This scene is watched by a shadowy figure wearing vulture feathers and a horned helmet, who wonders if perhaps Diana is skilled enough to be the one he's searching for. That evening at Diana's birthday feast, her classmate Aleka asks the queen if she and Diana can put on a demonstration of their combat training, despite the fact that they're too young to compete in the tournaments. Hippolyta agrees on the condition that they use wooden swords to avoid injury, but Aleka says, so low under her breath that only the nearby Diana can hear, that injury is exactly what she was planning. As they fight, Diana realizes that the mock battle has become real as her opponent is using all her strength, so she whacks the girl on the wrist, causing her to drop her sword. Despite now being on her back in the mud, Aleka refuses to yield, saying she's a true warrior of the Amazons. Diana replies that she's not yet, and the girl spits back that her opponent will never be, throwing mud in her face and calling her clay. The enraged princess starts pummeling the girl as her mother rushes forward, yelling for her to stop. Diana, realizing what she's done, stutters out an apology and runs off before anyone can stop her. She doesn't stop until she reaches a stream in the woods, where she falls to her knees in despair, gazing at her reflection in the water. She bemoans the fact that she's different than her sisters, then sees the silhouette of a horned figure behind her reflection. She spins around, throwing a dagger, but it's easily caught. She asks who the man is, and he reveals himself to be the god War. He offers to teach her, every night with a full moon, the ways of a warrior, and she gladly accepts. A year passes in a montage as we see her training with the Olympian, who we're told thinks he might finally be able to pass on his mantle someday, as well as her Amazon teachers, proving herself in her mother's eyes to be a worthy successor to the throne. Lastly, after a successful training session, we see Diana telling War she wants to fight with real weapons next time instead of wooden training swords. He replies that she doesn't know what she's asking, but he'll allow it. At their next meeting, he teaches her that warriors don't raise a sword against their opponents unless they mean to fight to the death. They battle for several hours, until Diana manages to disarm the god. But he grabs her wrist, knocking her to the ground and holding her own sword at her throat. She says she's ready to die, but instead he pulls her up onto her feet again, telling her that while warriors fight to the death, they should never be willing to accept it. When they meet again a month later, it's Diana's 13th birthday, and War has a challenge for her. He leads her to 2 stone pillars that she doesn't recognize, and a fissure in the hill inside which, he says, is a great treasure which will be perfect for her birthday offering for her mother. Once within, the young Amazon realizes she's entered a labyrinth, its floor littered with the bones and weapons of warriors who came before. She ties one end of her lasso, which apparently has the magic power of being way longer than it looks, to a boulder at the entrance, carrying the other in her hand as she searches the maze. As she descends the shadowy corridors, she hears a noise behind her, and when she turns is confronted by the hulking, red-eyed form of the Minotaur. She runs, thinking War must have transported her to Crete, but it gives chase, eventually sending her flying. Her lantern crashes to the ground, spilling flaming oil across the floor, which forces the beast back. It catches its foot in the loop of her trailing lasso, and with a sharp tug she manages to pull its legs out from under it. This only angers the beast, but as it prepares to charge, she remembers War using her own weapon against her. She leaps out of the way at the last moment, and the monster slams its head against the wall. Diana smashes a rock over the stunned creature's head, sending it toppling into the dust. War appears, congratulating the young Amazon. He tells her her mother will be speechless when she shows her prize, the Minotaur's head. He gives her a sword, and she raises it over the bull's neck, but then she sees that the look in its eyes has gone from fury to fear. She lowers her weapon, saying she won't kill like this. War is livid, shouting that a true warrior doesn't show mercy. Diana meekly points out that he showed her mercy when they battled with real swords, which gives him pause. He then tells her that ending conflict is the purpose of war, but she raises her sword against him, saying she won't kill a defenseless foe. He asks if she remembers what it means for a warrior to raise a sword against someone, and she tearfully replies that she does. Again furious, he backhands her, knocking the sword from her grip. He calls her his greatest failure, and says she will follow the path she's chosen alone from now on, before disappearing in a flash of smoke. When the girl turns, she sees the lumbering form of the Minotaur towering above her, but now it gazes at her with respect before wandering off. The princess makes her way out of the labyrinth, excited to tell her sisters what she's learned. Once outside, she's surprised to find herself back, or perhaps still, on Themyscira. She says she feels like showing the Minotaur mercy was the right thing to do, although she's not 100% sure, and wonders if her mother will accept mercy as a tribute. So like I said, this issue is very much styled after a 1960s Silver Age comic. There's a narration box here at the beginning that gives a little bio on her, and even says that her father is Zeus, but she doesn't know that, which then gets brought up later when she's crying at the stream. She's saying, "Oh, I don't have real parents, boo-hoo," and there's a little asterisk which leads down to a note from the editor, Malignant Matt, saying that she does have real parents in Hippolyta and Zeus, but she doesn't know it. It also says here at the beginning that this issue is a reprint from All Girl Adventure Tales for Men, number 41, which is completely made up, but very much in keeping with the classic 1960s style. The dialogue is hilariously overwritten. When she first surfaces in the cave and sees the queen, Hippolyta says, "Oh, I am your mother, Queen Hippolyta, and we have been waiting for you, blah, blah, blah." And, no one ever actually talks like that, but it's very classic Silver Age style. I love what they did with War here. He looks significantly younger than the previous appearances of this character. Instead of a big gray beard, it's actually still got some color in it. And instead of a suit, he's got on, leather armor, but still a bare chest. And his helmet has two spiraling horns on the top, which makes him look a whole lot more similar to George Perez's Ares from the 80s comics. I should also talk about Diana's costume. It's a really great young Diana version of the Wonder Woman costume. She's got a red armor breastplate with a big gold eagle on the front and shoulder straps. And she's got a blue skirt with white trim. Then there's kind of blue strips of fabric going down, like those skirts that Greek warriors would wear that were just made up of strips of leather, with a row of stars on them. And her tiara and belt and eagle, again, are gold instead of silver. Oh, and her shoes! Her shoes are very reminiscent of the post-Marsden 50s-era Wonder Woman costume, which was kind of like red sandals with crisscrossing straps across her shins. One thing that I thought was really interesting, when at first she doesn't recognize Ares, he calls himself Blood, Guts, Iron, and then finally his new 52 style name, War. And I'm like, wait a minute, Blood, Guts, Iron, why does that sound familiar? And then I looked, and that was actually the names of the first four New 52 Wonder Woman trade paperbacks. You had Blood, Guts, Iron, War, and then after that was Flesh and Bones. But I guess they weren't looking quite that far ahead at that point. There's a fun little Easter egg here, where in celebration of her successful training, War is pouring them a drink, and he says that he's got mead from the finest fermenter of any era named Markasan. And as I was reading that, I was going, well, wait a minute, mead? That's a Norse drink. They wouldn't be drinking that in a Greek society. What's up with that? And who's this Markasan guy? So I look it up, and there is a comic book writer named Markasan Nasso, who apparently will bring some homemade mead, which, in case you don't know, is a fermented honey wine, to different conventions and stuff, and share it with his fellow comics creators. So, people are apparently a fan, and he got shout-outs here in Wonder Woman, and also in the letter pages of Thor, God of Thunder, issue 3, as someone who makes really good mead. So, lovely little Easter egg there that was a lot of fun searching out. Again, we have the Minotaur, who we already saw this episode in the post-crisis issue. In this one, he does speak a little bit, but he's a bit less verbal, more along the lines of just Hulk smash instead of, "Oh, Theseus thought he had defeated me, but I survived," and blah, 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 blah. But I did find it amusing that the way Wonder Woman was able to defeat him is the way that you defeat the classic Spider-Man villain, the Rhino, in almost every video game that he's appeared. I have played a bunch of the different Spider-Man games, and almost every time he shows up, you stand in front of a wall, you wait for him to charge, you jump out of the way at the last second, and he smashes his head, and then you beat him up from behind. So seeing Diana use that exact same tactic on yet another horned animal type villain was, I thought, pretty funny. And really, fun is a good way to describe this entire issue, with the setting of going back to Diana's childhood and the 1960s style of storytelling. It was just really enjoyable, so I'm going to give this one 5 stars. And I don't have promos for the rest of the Wonder Woman podcast, so I'm just going to give them a little plug. Instead, starting with Lasso of Truth, it is hosted by a duo, Elle and Juliet, and they usually discuss an issue of Sensation Comics and some of the Wonder Woman Rebirth comics that are just now coming out, as well as, so far, just the pilot of the TV show. They have really great in-depth discussions, and you can find them on iTunes, support them on Patreon, and check out their website, lassooftruthpod.com. Next up is the TV show. We have Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 12, The Bushwhackers. Air date was January 29, 1977, starring Linda Carter and Lyle Waggoner. Roy Rogers played J.P. Hadley. Lance Kerwin played Jeff Hadley. Henry Darrow played Walt Lampkin. And David Yanez played Charlie Bright Eagle. At the Diamond H Ranch in Texas, we see an older man teaching a group of kids how to tie a bowline knot to create a lasso. He offers a boy named Charlie the chance to try the rope, but he's too shy, and one of the other overexcited kids is chosen instead. Suddenly, young Jeff Hadley rides up, telling his father JP that rustlers have stolen another 100 of their cattle in the night. JP calls the sheriff to report the theft, saying he's tired of their inability to solve the case, so he's going to call his connection in Washington. His connection turns out to be General Blankenship, and after some chit-chat about JP taking in war orphans from Shanghai, Paris, Harlem, London, and the Navajo, tells his old football teammate that beef rationing has made cattle rustling very lucrative, and he won't be able to fulfill his military contract to feed the armed services if the thefts continue. Blankenship decides to send Steve, and the crew talks about how dangerous the rustlers are if JP had to send all the way to DC for help. When he sees how nervous Diane is about him going, Steve tells her she works too much and orders her to take a few days' leave while he's away. Of course, she decides to follow him to Texas, spinning into her costume as soon as he's gone and trailing him in the invisible plane. Too late, JP gets a visit from the sheriff and deputy to convince him that they can handle the case, but he tells them Major Trevor is already on his way. The deputy, Walt Lampkin, reacts badly to the news, and JP and the sheriff chalk it up to hurt pride. But then later, we see him arrive at the ghost town that the rustlers are using as a base, and it's revealed he's in on the thefts. He lets the leader of the rustlers, Emmett Dawson, know about Steve's imminent arrival. Emmett thinks they should call it quits now that the military is involved, but they have one last delivery they need to make, and you do not call quits on the mob. Walt convinces Emmett that they only need to keep Major Trevor distracted for 24 hours, then they'll be out of the rustling business. We get a scene of breakfast at the ranch where JP tries to talk to Jeff about his sullen attitude lately, but they're interrupted, as always, by the other kids, except for the Navajo boy Charlie, who we're told is out for a ride. Steve lands in Texas, but on his way to the ranch gets misled into taking the wrong road and is forced to stop when a boulder blocks his path. He gets out to move it aside, but the ground beneath his feet gives way and he falls into a pit. Emmett and one of his men appear from hiding and shift the boulder over the opening, trapping the Major inside and ensuring no one will find him until their last job is complete. Charlie saw the whole thing, however, and when Wonder Woman arrives at the ranch and learns Steve is missing, leads her to the spot, despite being nonverbal. At this point, Steve's not even surprised to be rescued by the amazing Amazon, who tells him she's investigating the rustlers as well. Back at the Diamond H, Steve tells the sheriff and deputy what happened, and the sheriff wants to investigate personally, but Walt convinces him to let him and Billy Joe, another lawman who we saw at the rustlers' hideout, take the case. They leave, and Wonder Woman enters, complimenting JP on his children and asking about Charlie. He tells her and Steve that the boy's mother died in childbirth, and his father, who worked on the ranch, lost his life at Pearl Harbor, which is when Charlie began to distance himself from others and stop talking. JP is in the process of adopting the boy, however, with the government checking to see if he has any living relatives first. The next day, Walt visits the ghost town, berating Emmett for Steve's not having been stopped. We see Wonder Woman telling the adopted kids about the power of her belt and bracelets, then joining Steve and JP's discussion about the rustlers, where they wonder if the thieves' uncanny skill indicates an informant. JP suspects correctly that Emmett is the leader, although there's no way to prove it and no one can find him. He tells them that Emmett was an orphan, and how his being a black sheep in the community because he wasn't supported as a kid helped inspire JP to adopt. Back with the kids, Wonder Woman demonstrates the power of her lasso, and we see Jeff go to visit Walt. It turns out the deputy has used the boy's feelings of abandonment to convince him to inform on the ranch's operations, letting the rustlers know exactly when and where to strike. Despite his reservations, Jeff lets him know that the cattle will be unguarded that night. He also tells the man about Wonder Woman, and is tasked with learning how she gets her strength. Walt returns to the ghost town, letting the rest of the thieves know about Wonder Woman and planning what should be their last heist. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Steve and JP try to figure out who the informant could be. JP says he's known Sheriff Bodie his entire life, but Deputy Lampkin only joined the community a year ago. Steve drives off to the base to run a background check, causing the terrified Jeff, unable to reach the deputy, to call Emmett, warning him about Steve's investigation. Wonder Woman, Jeff, and JP go out riding, and when they stop for water, Jeff's horse is spooked by a snake and they take off running, with the boy's foot still caught in the stirrup and barely holding on. Wonder Woman jumps onto her horse and takes off after them, finally reaching the startled animal and calming it to a stop. Jeff has a sprained ankle, but is otherwise unhurt, thanking the Amazon and saying he won't forget her saving his life. The guys head back while Wonder Woman continues riding, when suddenly a police car comes up behind her, sirens blazing. They speed ahead and block her path, then Walt and Billy Joe get out, dragging Wonder Woman down from her horse and pulling the magic belt off. They shove the now powerless hero into the car and take her to the ghost town, abandoning her in the jail's still fully functional cell. Thankfully, this was all witnessed by Charlie, so he runs back and grabs the dropped belt and lasso. We next see Steve driving back from the base, but when Walt's car pulls up behind and starts signaling him to stop, he leads them on a chase. They eventually corner the Major, and he tells the lawman that he knows the truth, that the real Walt Lampkin died in the war, and the deputy stole his identity and is probably the one behind the rustlers. Charlie reaches home, and for the first time in 9 months, speaks, telling his adopted siblings they need to save Wonder Woman. They arrive at the ghost town, breaking down the jailhouse door with a battering ram and passing the Amazon her belt and lasso through the bars. Her strength restored, she bends those bars apart with her bare hands, and they return home. She tells JP what happened, and as they wonder how Walt could have known, Jeff speaks up. He's had a change of heart since Wonder Woman rescued him, so he confesses to being the rustler's mole. He explains that he was jealous for his father's attention ever since they took in so many kids, and the two have a heart-to-heart. When it's over, Wonder Woman asks about Steve, and Jeff directs them to the ghost town. We see the rustlers lock the Major in a meat freezer, then Wonder Woman arrives. She takes out the watchmen, with the ranch kids tying them up, and she and JP arrive at the freezer just as Steve manages to force the door open. A brief battle with the rustlers ensues, and our heroes prove victorious. Sometime later, with her mission over, Wonder Woman prepares to leave. She wishes the rest of the kids farewell, then goes over to Charlie, standing aloof from the group. She says she has to go, but will visit when she can. He gives her a decorated leather belt to remember him by, and when she offers to give him any gift, he asks that she teach him to use a lasso, to which she smilingly agrees. This episode is definitely unique in that there are no Nazis or spies or anything. It's the Western theme is a complete change of pace, and to be honest, it's kind of nice. We've had, probably all 11 previous episodes plus the pilot involve Nazi spies, so it's nice to switch it up with a more domestic threat. At one point, Wonder Woman mentions that she didn't bring any luggage, and JP says she can borrow some clothes from his housekeeper. Yeah, minor detail. The woman is a lot shorter and wider than mid-20s Linda Carter, so it's a little ridiculous that we see Wonder Woman spend almost the whole rest of this episode in a pair of fitted white pants and a low-cut red top. Obviously, the real reason was they wanted her wearing a bit more clothing than normal in this episode, but I don't know, maybe we can say that the housekeeper's daughter is away at college and she's letting Wonder Woman borrow some of her things? Yeah, that works. Let's go with that. JP, of course, played by none other than Roy Rogers, the King of Cowboys. This was one of his last roles. He had retired, but when they asked if he would take the role, he said yes if they could include a message about adoption as part of the story, since that was a cause he was championing at the time. In case you're unaware, Roy Rogers was a staple in Western movies from the 30s to the 50s. Very famous for playing a cowboy. He and his wife Dale Evans starred in The Roy Rogers Show that was very popular in the 50s. They're also famous for setting up a lot of children's charities. Henry Darrow, who played Deputy Lambkin, was also in a lot of westerns, especially in several different takes on Zorro in the 80s and 90s. I looked into the kids to see if any of them happened to grow up to be famous actors. The only one I found worth noting is Link, the boy who was from the Bronx. He was played by Christophe St. John. He joined the soap opera The Young and the Restless in the early 90s and has been a regular on that show ever since, and has actually won a couple of daytime Emmys. As for David Yanez, who played Charlie, he has a few more movie credits, but it seems like he grew up to become a pastor and run an evangelism ministry. I can't find any direct connection between the David Yanez in the show and the one who runs this ministry, but he's about the same age and at the very least looks like he could be a 40-year older version of the kid from this episode. So yeah, pretty cool. The kids on this episode were reasonably entertaining. Obviously a bit of eat your vegetables, kids, and make sure you buckle your seatbelt, but it wasn't too obnoxious. They mostly managed to stay away from overusing stereotypes, except for one very glaring exception. Freddie, the kid from London, he is in no way like a child. He is every cheesy cliche about upper-class British people that you can possibly imagine. He only refers to people by their full names, so Charles instead of Charlie, and he's constantly drinking tea, and it's just so ridiculous. But like I said, other than that, it was something that I'm sure was not common at the time to show all these kids of different nationalities all being adopted into one family. I mean, for crying out loud, that would be novel today, even. So that was really great to see. And something that I didn't actually know about, I'm reading here that Charlie's dad shouldn't actually have been at Pearl Harbor, since as a single parent he was disqualified from the draft. Which I didn't know that was the thing, and it's really cool to know. I mean, obviously, yeah, it creates a plot hole for the show. Although, to be fair, technically they didn't say he was a soldier at Pearl Harbor. I'm sure there were people who weren't enlisted who died during that attack, so I don't know, he was visiting there on vacation or something. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. But I realized I'd never thought about how the draft would work with single-parent households like that. So, I'm glad to hear that reasonable exceptions were made. The thing with Jeff being jealous of his father now spending time with these other kids, yeah, that was pretty cliche. But that was really kind of the only part that I really didn't care for in this episode. Other than that, it really was pretty good, so I'm going to give it 4 stars. The next Wonder Woman podcast I'm going to plug is Wonder Words. It is focused on the Wonder Woman TV show, hosted by Brad and Efren. You can find them on iTunes and their Facebook page, and at bradleybearmedia.libsyn.com. So I wanted to do something special for this first anniversary show, and we've been dealing a lot with Wonder Woman's different origins in these early comics. And back when we did the 75th anniversary crossover, I gave kind of a summary of how I would do Wonder Woman's origin if DC came to me and said, hey, we want you to take over Wonder Woman, everything from scratch, whatever you want to do, do it. Which, I mean, obviously is never going to happen. But I got some positive feedback for that, and a request to write it up more fully, so that's what I've done here. Now, I have never really read or written much fan fiction, and let's be honest here, I'm not a writer by any stretch of the imagination, I can come up with good ideas for stories, but actual characters and plot and stuff like that, I'm completely lost. So this is going to be a little bit of an experiment, kind of mashing up different Wonder Woman origin bits with some of my own things. So if you like it, let me know. And if you don't, you're welcome to skip it. I won't be offended. Some 1,200 years before Christ, the age of Greek heroes is at its height. From Mount Olympus, Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, looks down and sees that women everywhere are under the thumb of men who've grown cruel thanks to that ultimate corrupter, unchecked power. The Olympians had meant for the genders to be egalitarian, but where the gods wanted equality, domination reigns. Aphrodite decides the time has come to restore balance. With the help of Athena, goddess of wisdom, she shapes women from the dust of the earth and grants them the divine gift of life, turning rough clay into flesh and blood and creating a new civilization. They charge their daughters with a mission: to teach the world that both men and women are created equal, and are equally deserving of respect. They appoint a queen, Hippolyta, granting her a golden girdle that gives its wearer immense power. 20 years pass, and this new culture has established itself a city-state on the coast of modern-day Turkey called Amazonia, where men are forbidden to set foot. The wary rulers of the rest of Greece are unsure of these women and their strangely peaceful warrior culture, fearing what everyone fears at their core: the unknown. As such, King Eurystheus assigns the hero Heracles his 9th labor, to retrieve the girdle of the Amazon Queen. The son of Zeus arrives with his soldiers, thinking the only way to obtain the girdle is by military might. But before they reach the city, they spot a lone woman standing in the road, Queen Hippolyta herself, axe at the ready and decked out in the traditional Amazon armor of a red cuirass decorated with a gold eagle, blue tarugi skirt made of strips of studded leather, and the golden girdle at her waist. She offers Heracles a challenge: single combat, with the girdle going to the winner. He thoughtfully considers the idea while his men break into raucous laughter, only to fall silent when Amazon archers step out from behind the trees, arrows nocked and surrounding the invaders. Heracles, impressed at their use of strategy, agrees to single combat, and the two armies regroup behind their champion. The battle is fierce, but Hippolyta outmaneuvers the demigod, forcing him to yield. She suggests peace between their people, and he agrees, and they hold a feast to cement the alliance with celebration. But Zeus's son deceives the queen, secretly ordering his men to attack when the wine flows free. In her chambers, he sucker punches Hippolyta, pulling the girdle off her unconscious form. She awakens to find herself and her people beaten, abused, and chained at the wrist, being forced to march to his ships as Amazonia burns to cinders behind them. She cries out to their patron goddesses, and when they try to tell her she's failed them, she angrily retorts that they failed her. She may have let men enter the city, but it was meant as a gesture of peace and goodwill, and to show that the Amazons respected them as equals, all as part of their gods-given mission to teach the world of men. Taken aback, the goddesses agree to free her people from their chains, and the liberated Amazons drive their captors into the wilderness, Hippolyta personally sending Heracles running, although in her fury she forgets to retrieve the girdle. Now alone on the shore, the Amazons look around at the charcoal city behind them and the abandoned ships and open ocean before them. Their queen furiously calls on the goddesses again, demanding they find them a new homeland, one where they can be free of the violence and deception of men. They agree to lead her to a hidden island where they can live in peace, granting them eternal youth so long as they ensure that no man will ever set foot there. The queen agrees, ordering her women to keep their manacles on their wrists as a reminder of the last time they tried to bend that rule. On this island paradise, called Themyscira, they build themselves a new home, living in peace and protected from the outside world. More than 3,000 years pass, and the Amazons and their gods fade into legend. The Olympians still watch the Earth, but now take a backseat role with a world that no longer worships them. That is until AD 1941, on the day that the Oracle of Apollo has a horrifying premonition of mankind harnessing her god's power to create a weapon more destructive than any that came before, one which could be used to destroy Gaia, the Earth goddess herself. A council is convened, and Aphrodite and Athena offer to send a champion from their last small group of worshippers, the Amazons. They arrange for an allied pilot to be blown off course, allowing him through the mist that protects Themyscira from man's world. He crashes on the beach and is carried via stretcher to the House of Healing. Hippolyta is horrified that his arrival means the death of her people, but the goddesses appear, telling her of their plan. One Amazon will be sent back with the man to help fight for freedom and justice in the war that threatens to engulf the entire world in Apollo's fire. And, they hint heavily, it would be a good opportunity to teach man's world the value of equality, since the Amazons never actually finished that part of their mission. Hippolyta is less than thrilled, but will do as the goddesses command. She decides that as queen, and the one who decided to segregate them from the rest of humanity, she'll be the one to go, sparing her subjects the indignity of having to set foot on man's world. To aid her mission, a ceremony takes place in which goddesses appear, granting her abilities greater than any Amazon before. Power and strength from Demeter, beauty and a loving heart from Aphrodite, wisdom from Athena, the ability to speak and read any language from Mnemosyne, and the eye of a hunter and unity with beasts from Artemis, as well as a costume which will clearly communicate to the xenophobic people of the country she's going to which side she's on in no uncertain terms. With this new status, her people give her a new title, the Thaumasia, which they cheer over and over at the ceremony's end in celebration. Steve, blindfolded but recovered enough to be carried there on a litter, wonders aloud what it means, and with her new power of communication, she replies that in his tongue, it means Wonder Woman. Aphrodite gets her husband Hephaestus to repair Trevor's plane, and when he's finished, Athena brings over the cap of invisibility she gave to the hero Perseus, bestowing some of its power on the aircraft. In this now invisible plane, Wonder Woman returns Steve to man's world, delivering him to Walter Reed Hospital to recover. There she befriends one of Steve's nurses, Diana Prince, who invites the Amazon to stay at her apartment at a women's residence when she learns the stranger doesn't have a place to stay. Over the next few weeks, the two become fast friends, as Diana helps Hippolyta navigate the bizarreness of man's world. Wonder Woman gets plenty of public attention tackling street crime and social issues, especially after Trevor goes public with the story of his rescue, but has difficulty finding more substantial ways to help the war effort, like tracking down spies. Shortly after Steve is released from the hospital, however, Diana's fiancé writes her, saying he's secured a contract in Brazil and has things prepared for their wedding. Hippolyta is sad to lose her friend, but has come to a conclusion. In order to take on bigger cases that will influence the war, she needs inside information, and she can't get that as Wonder Woman. She moves out of the residence and gets an apartment under the name Diana Prince, since she and her friend had similar heights and hair color. She sees an ad in the paper for a secretary position in the military intelligence offices, where Steve works. She gets a job and becomes the secretary of Colonel Darnell, Steve's commanding officer. There she's able to get the scoop on spies and saboteurs, and spends the war battling the likes of Austrian noblewoman turned Nazi spy master Baroness Paula von Gunther and Princess Maru of Japan, daughter of Emperor Hirohito, who disguises herself as a man to work as a chemical weapons developer called Dr. Poison. One mission does take Wonder Woman to Brazil, where she's reunited with the real Diana, now Mrs. White, and seeing the woman caring for her young daughter awakens a longing in Hippolyta she'd never known was there. Seeing Wonder Woman's constant intervention inspires the military to hire women in roles traditionally filled by men, and helps give American women the confidence to enter the workplace. She's in the newspapers constantly, and one photo of her flexing her bicep inspires J. Howard Miller to paint a poster of a working-class woman in the same pose, with the soon-to-be immortal words, "We can do it." As Secretary Prince, Hippolyta ends up working closely with Major Trevor, and slowly gains respect for the man, which, given time, could become more. But those feelings, and even her friendship with Diana, aren't enough to keep Hippolyta from returning home as soon as it's apparent the war's end is imminent. She never truly got over her repulsion for man's world, and, sure her mission is complete and the world has been set on the path of equality, turns her back on the outside world and returns home. But even back in paradise, the desire to have a daughter, to be the one to mold a new life, to feel the absolute joy that is the unconditional love between mother and child, never leaves the queen. It buries itself deep within her for decades, until, her heart full to bursting, she goes to the beach, sculpts an infant from the dirt, and begs the goddesses to bring life to one more Amazon. Aphrodite and Athena answer her prayer, and beneath Hippolyta's fingers the dried mud sloughs away, revealing the tenderest of flesh. The child, named after the woman who helped her mother adapt to life in man's world, slowly grows up, guided by the love of her mother and all her Amazon sisters. Unlike the others, she does age, but at a slower rate than normal, her childhood taking much longer than the usual 2 decades. Fast forward to today, whenever today is. The 1970s, the 20-teens, the 2140s, it doesn't matter. A storm washes a boat onto the shores of Themyscira, and when the Queen's envoy approaches, a large figure steps out and exclaims in a Texas accent, "Woo woo!" She turns out to be a college student named Etta Candy, who, while working on her degree in archaeology, found rumors of a hidden civilization of immortal Amazons, and decided that investigating herself would be a grand adventure. She'd been sailing in the area when she got caught in a storm, and when her boat finally came to rest, she found she'd reached her destination. The Amazons welcome their newfound sister, but are baffled at how she could have gotten through the protective mist, until she reveals the artifact that ultimately led her to the area, the long-lost girdle of Aphrodite, which one of her professors had dug up in an expedition. At a welcome banquet, the Amazons are eager to hear of the outside world, asking about the equality their queen established. Etta replies that things had improved a bit with World War II, but then they got worse, and then they started to improve, though in spurts, and not for everyone. In some parts of the world, equality is celebrated, and while it's far from perfect, the women living there have been fighting for their rights for decades and enjoy immense freedom. But on 2/3 of the planet, that's not the case. Women there risk being bought and sold like cattle. Young girls' bodies are mutilated, and those who have survived horrific atrocities are violently executed for seducing their attackers. The Amazons are rocked to their very core. They were sure that their queen had fulfilled their mission and had set the world on the right path, and that after all this time things would have been different. Hippolyta, deeply in shock, calls for a Congress of Amazons, a meeting where every sister can speak her mind and they decide as a group what to do. There they finally conclude that their mission to bring equality is impossible to fulfill if they remain hidden from man's world any longer. The time has come to reveal their existence, and to do that they will need an envoy to be their representative to the outside world. They will send another champion of Themyscira, and this time the queen decides she's unfit for the task, having failed so miserably the last time. Her daughter, now a young adult who's become increasingly exasperated at being the baby of a family of tri-millenarians, volunteers, saying she's always been curious to see the world her mother and sisters left behind. Hippolyta flatly refuses, however, thinking her daughter too young, and instead calls for a tournament to decide the Amazon most worthy of that kind of power. But Diana, face hidden beneath a Corinthian helmet, enters the contest, winning round after round. At last she reaches the final challenge, where she and the other finalists have to recreate her mother's signature move, blocking bullets, in this case rubber ones, fired from a machine gun Hippolyta brought back from man's world, using only their cuffs. Diana wins this battle of bullets and bracelets, and Hippolyta begins to congratulate the champion, calling her the most worthy of the Amazons. But then the crowd's cheers fall silent when Diana pulls off her helmet. The queen is visibly astonished, sure that there was no way the youngest Amazon could have defeated all of her sisters, but ultimately realizes that she was wrong. She declares Diana their champion, and at the ceremony there are 2 new gods, having seen how well the last Thaumacia kept the world safe from utter destruction, there to bestow their gifts as well. Hestia grants her fire to open men's hearts, and Iris gives her the power of speed and flight. Bidding both her mother and sisters farewell, Diana uses her new power to lift Etta in her arms and fly them both to the mainland. Having struck up a friendship with the woman, and remembering her mother's tales of her time at the women's residence, Diana decides to join Etta at the Holiday College for Women in order to learn more about man's world. Since she looks the right age to be in college, she contemplates enrolling under the name Diana Prince, but ultimately decides that if Themyscira wants to reveal itself to the rest of humanity, then the time for masked identities is over. Instead, she audits classes, studying whatever interests her. In this way, she meets the head of the archaeology department, Professor Julia Capitalis, and her daughter Vanessa, a high school student who takes some early college classes, as well as the occasional visiting lecturer, Dr. Helena Sandsmark. Diana makes friends easily, with them and with Etta's sisters in the Beta Lambda sorority. In addition to studying, she uses her abilities to help out wherever she can, such as when she rescues a 100% perfectly normal human 6-year-old girl with nothing strange or unusual about her from a fire that destroyed her home and killed her parents. Still too unfamiliar with man's world to know what to do with the child, clad only in a t-shirt from the punk band Titans of Myth, whose album Dark Angel topped the charts for an astonishing 10 weeks, Diana takes the girl, named Donna Troy, to Themyscira to be raised as an Amazon. Time passes, and once she feels like she's learned enough to be mostly comfortable with this strange new world, Diana flies to New York, landing in the middle of a meeting of the UN General Assembly. She announces the existence of the Amazons' island paradise, and their mission in finally revealing themselves to the rest of humanity. And when the astonished representatives ask who she is, she replies that she is Diana, Princess of Themyscira, but they can call her Wonder Woman. I wanted to bring Athena into more prominence with the Amazons' origin, because I thought that was something that really was only hinted at in Marsden, that love needs to be balanced by wisdom or logic, and logic needs to be balanced by love. You know, kind of like how someone will love a person to the point of making excuses for violent abuse, but then if you go all Vulcan and look at every situation with only logic, your mind can come up with some pretty messed up, heartless ideas. I kept the idea of the Amazons all being formed from clay because I don't like the modern trope of giving Diana angst by feeling she's unnatural, but I wanted to make it 100% sure that these are real, normal women, not golems or walking mud people. I tried to make the Amazon armor look vaguely like the classic Wonder Woman costume, but composed of real Greek armor. And reading up on the Amazons, I saw that in mythology they were famous for using bows and axes, so that's what I armed them with. I wanted them to have a justifiable reason to bully the gods into letting them go into hiding, but also for it to have been the wrong choice. Sure, what happened to them was awful, but they still had a mission, and they were kind of abandoning it the first time they faced any resistance. I really like Wonder Woman in the World War II setting, and it makes sense to me that it would take a massive threat to the entire world before the Amazons are willing to leave their isolation. I mean, they've been there literally thousands of years and had no desire to ever interact with the rest of the world ever again. But the problem with World War II is that there was a World War I before it, and at the time it seemed like the worst war that could possibly ever happen. But then I figured, wait, we have magic and the will of the gods. So it wasn't difficult to come up with the idea that even the war to end all wars wasn't enough, but then the imminent arrival of weapons that used the same power as the sun, and the sun god also being the god of prophecy, meant that they finally realized it was time to intervene. If we're splitting the Wonder Woman identity into multiple women throughout the years, I figured the powers should go with the title, and that allowed me to have different goddesses come in for new powers like flight. I did want to keep it goddesses, though, which is why I switched Perez's Hermes to the female messenger god Iris. Plus, I figured given Wonder Woman's fan base, adding the goddess of rainbows would be appropriate. As for the Greek title, I managed to find someone who knows some ancient Greek and asked them how you say Wonder Woman. Technically, thaumasia is the word for wonder, but apparently Greek words have specific genders, like Spanish, so I'm pretty sure that works. The Greek Wikipedia page also translates it to Thaumatogenieka, but I think that's the more modern, literal version. And I wanted something a bit more ancient and figurative. I was very tempted to add that the way they healed Steve was with a special kind of flower, kind of like Athelos in Lord of the Rings. They mentioned it in the movie, but it's much more prominent in the books. So I had this idea that there was this special shrub with magenta blossoms that was unique to Paradise Island called a ray bush, R-H-A-I, but then I figured that was a little too much on the nose for a healing purple ray, so I cut it. Since my version of the Amazons isn't really science-based, I wanted a more mythological origin for the invisible plane, but try as I might, I couldn't find a goddess of metalworking. So I used Aphrodite's connection with Hephaestus, and yeah, technically the cap of invisibility belongs to Hades, but Athena was the one who gave it to Perseus, so that kind of worked out. I almost made it a prototype jet, but I did my research and there was only like 3 types of jets used by both sides during World War II, and they didn't really come into use until later in the war, so I kept it a classic plane. My version of the original Diana Prince isn't a twin to Wonder Woman. They just happen to be about the same height and both have dark hair. Because, yeah, the exact twin thing is kind of cute, but I wanted something grounded a little bit more in realism. And honestly, I'm not worried about Steve recognizing the name of his nurse because, I'm sorry, let's face it, nurses are great and amazing, and when you're sick in the hospital, they are the best people ever. But when you leave and have been discharged for, a few weeks, you're probably not going to remember their names. Or at least I don't. I don't know, maybe that's just me. I'm pretty horrible with names. If you've seen the TV show Agent Carter, the first season, she lived in a women's residence, and I really liked that part, so I wanted to bring that into the story here. And, okay, before anyone gets all bent out of shape about, oh, how dare you say Hippolyta would feel envious and want to have a kid just because her friend has one now. That's coming from my own experiences as a woman who can't have kids and didn't realize how big of a deal that would be until all my friends started having their own families. Look, I'm not saying that that's every woman out there, but I am saying I'm like that, and by extension, my version of Hippolyta. I do like Steve as a character, and I like their romance when it's not too one-sided, but sadly it had to go if you're going to have Hippolyta go back to Paradise Island and cut off ties with the outside world again. If she's in love with Steve, she doesn't really have a reason. Unless you've got some lame, contrived thing about, oh, the goddesses say you must return, which doesn't really work with how I wanted the rest of the story to go. I mean, I guess you could do that they fall in love and then he's killed in the war and she rejects the world again. But I'm really not a fan of when a woman character is killed off just to give the male hero motivation. So I didn't want to turn tables and do the same thing to Steve. So, unfortunately, I did have to sacrifice that relationship. I did try to make it a little more nuanced than "I'm in love with the first man I ever saw" shtick from the 40s. I wanted it to be a bit more, I resent you at first, I don't like you. Okay, we've gone on cases together and now I've got kind of a grudging respect for you. Okay, now we're friends and who knows, maybe this could turn into something more. I'm just not honestly sure how well I did that. Look, spoiler alert, I'm not exactly Jane Austen here. Even after the war, the Amazons keep hidden from the rest of the world, so I needed a really good reason for them to come out again. This is where I might get a little bit controversial. I don't think the stuff that most of us in the West have to deal with would be enough to bring them out of hiding. I'm not saying that stuff isn't important. Please don't get me wrong. Far, far from it. But I do think it's important to keep a broader perspective and realize how very privileged we are when compared to the rest of the world. And so I had it that finding out that horrific, horrific treatment of women is still going on when they thought they'd put a stop to it is what finally makes the Amazons realize they need to rejoin humanity. I was kind of thinking about how everyone looks at people even just a few years younger than them and considers them, kind of juvenile and inexperienced. Like how teens look down on kids and college kids look down on teenagers and 30-somethings look down on college kids and 50-year-olds look down on 30-somethings, over and over and over. And I tried to think how that would work with women who've been around for over 3,000 years dealing with their daughter who's under 500. I mean, they love her, no doubt about it, but in their eyes, she's basically a toddler. And I think everyone remembers in your late teens and early 20s when you're trying to be an adult and people around you still think of you as a kid and how very frustrating that is. That was my motivation for Diana wanting to leave Paradise, to prove to her family that she's no longer a kid and she's just as capable as they are. I figured Holiday College would be a good excuse to bring in characters from throughout Wonder Woman's history. The Capitelluses, of course, and Helena Sandsmark is the mother of Cassie, who we will see eventually become the second Wonder Girl. And I wanted to really simplify the incredibly convoluted backstory that is the first Wonder Girl, Donna Troy, by taking her back to her very, very original simple roots. But I'll admit I couldn't help adding in that t-shirt with Easter eggs for her different incarnations. Lastly, I was going to say that Wonder Woman was specifically going to the UN to be the representative for Themyscira, but let's face it, I'm still a little bit bitter about that whole honorary ambassador thing, so I wasn't willing to go quite that far. The last Wonder Woman podcast I want to plug is Satin Tights, a Wonder Woman podcast. They have yet to produce an episode, but are scheduled to come out with one in May of 2017. It is going to be focused on the Linda Carter show, and is set to be hosted by Ray and Paul. And they've had a really great social media presence for quite a while. You can look up their Facebook and Twitter pages, and their blog, satintights.wordpress.com. Alright, on to the news. Not very much news for this month. Or, well, technically there is news, but mostly it's new stills and some new teasers for the movie. At this point in a movie's release, I usually cut myself off from promotional material. I stop watching trailers and stop looking at pictures just because I don't want to spoil too much for myself. I don't want to risk overhyping the film. But if you do want to see that kind of stuff, I will include some links in the show notes. We do also have some news here that Warner Bros. Is spending... hold on, I can do math. About $400,000 more on Wonder Woman advertising than they did for Suicide Squad. At least in the TV ads, it looks like. There were some people online saying that there wasn't enough promotion for the movie and wondered if the studio was trying to, just not make too big of a fuss because they thought it wasn't going to do real well. But apparently their strategy is to have all the promos and things show up after Guardians of the Galaxy comes out on May 5th. Which, honestly, is pretty smart because Guardians, already has a movie out and people love it. And while everyone loves Wonder Woman, there's still concern about how popular the movie's going to be. Whereas with Guardians, I'll be honest, I am super pumped for Guardians Volume 2. It's going to be so much fun. The first one is one of my favorite Marvel movies, so definitely looking forward to the sequel. We also have here that NASCAR driver Danica Patrick will have a Wonder Woman paint scheme on her car for 2 upcoming races. So there's pictures here, and it looks pretty darn cool. As always, I will of course include links to this in the show notes, and you can find those on the website at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. Alright, first anniversary episode in the can! I want to thank everybody for listening for the last year, or however long you've listened. Probably shorter than that, let's be honest here. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, conundrums, or queries, you can email me at wonderwomanwarriorforpeace@gmail.com. Please let me know if you're okay with your message being read on the podcast. The homepage is wonderwomanwarriorforpeace.wordpress.com. There you can find the RSS feed and promo, as well as the show notes and links to the iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play feeds. You can look the show up on Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram under Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace, and on Twitter and Pinterest as Wonder Woman WFP. The intro music was Wonder Woman theme, The Best Themysciran Symphony Dialogue Dance Mix by Taz Damien Devil. You can watch the full video on his YouTube channel. The outro music is Wonder by the Double Clicks, and you can find them on their website at thedoubleclicks.com. Next episode, I will be reviewing Sensation Comics Volume 1, Issue 12, Wonder Woman Volume 2, Issue 14, Wonder Woman Volume 4, Issue 13, and Wonder Woman Season 1, Episode 13. But until then, remember, sisters, hopes may fade, but wonders never cease.
'Cause you're not a quitter, you still believe the truth's in your lasso, your heart's on your sleeve, and when we're drowning in darkness, you'll save us all from going under, and we'll watch you in wonder.